It is such a pleasure to be here with you tonight, Senator Palumbo.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's certainly my pleasure to be here.
You have led the fight against bail reform laws in the state of New York to keep communities safer and the job of law enforcement less dangerous. And you recently called upon Governor Kathy Hochul to reverse failed criminal justice policies. Were there any changes made in the New York State budgets to the bail reform laws? And if there was changes made in the budget, how would that protect New Yorkers from crimes and their public safety?
There really were no significant changes at all, believe it or not. There is a dynamic, particularly in the Democratic Party, where you have a really progressive group that doesn't want any type of criminal justice at all, not just reforms, that they don't want any real punishment because they feel that the system has been broken, and for a variety of reasons that I think the cause and effect is certainly debatable. When I was in the Assembly was when it was during the budget, actually, that this policy was implemented in 2019, and I argued against it. I was at the time the ranking Republican on the Judiciary Committee, a former prosecutor myself. My father was a homicide detective in Suffolk County, so I'm from a law enforcement family. And I argued against it, explained that many of these bills or many of these crimes that the bill was rendering ineligible for bail were actually serious crimes. And I said, look, manslaughter in the second degree, if you're drunk driving and you drive up on the sidewalk and kill 3 people, the top charge is manslaughter in the second degree. And the Assemblywoman who was carrying the bill as an individual bill and then was debating it in the budget said, oh, no. She was a lawyer for a very short period of time. She practiced and said, oh, no, you could charge murder. And I said, well, actually, no, you can't, because I've handled many of those, and our Court of Appeals has said that's not, in fact, murder. So there was just a level of arrogance to do that and thinking that they were going to make the world a better place with all of these reforms. Bottom line, it's implemented for maybe 2 months, and the world was beside themselves. They had to make some changes and at least add crimes where there's a fatality to bail-eligible offenses. It's been even worse. They didn't fix it. They didn't come anywhere close to what needed to be done. They had basically a pretend fix in this most recent budget. They had press releases and said, we did it, hooray, but it does nothing. It adds a few more crimes. And still, your first offense, for example, if I sell enough fentanyl to kill everyone in this building, and it's less than 2 ounces, it's a Class A2 felony, the judge must release me, not may. That's the law as we sit here today.
So on April 25th, you sounded an alarm with other New York State Republican senators regarding advancing pro-criminal policies, such as the clean slate and the Office of Expungement bills, which would essentially erase criminals' records. So how would that affect business owners when they're trying to find out information on prospective employees?
Well, that's the biggest issue, that now someone who has, for example, a history of DWI and is applying to be maybe a driver at your business, you will not know whether or not they've ever been convicted of DWI. And in certain circumstances or in certain situations, like in New York City, the city council has passed bills where you're not allowed to ask if anyone's even been convicted of a crime. So you merge those two together. You may hire someone to be your driver, to maybe drive kids, and you don't even know if they've ever had any drinking and driving offenses, particularly because they're automatically expunged. And under that bill, sealed rather to the world, every 3 years or after 3 years, misdemeanors are sealed, and after 7, all felonies, including murder.
The clean slate and Office of Expungement bills were passed during National Crime Victims Week. What kind of message do you think that sends to the public, and especially victims of crime?
It's just offensive, right? And it's pretty cruel, in my opinion, as someone who sat with crime victims, families of homicide victims, rape victims, and have spent time with the ramifications of violent crime. And to just do that with impunity is really unfortunate. And quite frankly, that, from more of a global picture, that's the problem with what we're seeing in New York. We have one-party rule. They have supermajorities in both houses. And we have a governor who's playing right along with it. Believe it or not, Andrew Cuomo, with all of the problems that man had, was more moderate than Kathy Hochul. When she took office, she was an NRA-endorsed congresswoman from Western New York. And now we see her jumping on the bandwagon in order to get reelected. So it's about power, and that's why I'm really hopeful that we're going to have a real good shot this November to take the House back, at least the Senate. And quite frankly, for governor, I think we have an excellent candidate in my congressman, Lee Zeldin. So I'm rooting for him. And that balance is what we need. Someone who can bring some common sense back to the New York State legislature.
Crime rates in various parts of the state of New York have skyrocketed. In the first 3 months in New York City, it went up 44% compared to last year. What steps do you think can be taken to reverse this drastic trend?
Give judges discretion to set bail based upon the dangerousness of an individual. Almost every other state does that. When I was a young prosecutor, we had a score sheet on someone's ties to the community when you were considering bail. If they scored over a certain number, they were eligible to be released without bail, meaning ROR, released on their own recognizance. New Jersey does that, and they have a dangerousness standard. So New Jersey implemented, quote unquote, reforms, but they actually have some common sense aspect to it where the judge can say, you know what, this is dangerous. For example, in committee yesterday, coming out of codes was Billy's Law, where a fireman lost his life responding to a fire where the arsonist who set fire to the building that day set fire to a building the day before and set fire to a building a few days before that and continued to be released. So the answer is simple. When people aren't out on the street who are career criminals, they don't commit crimes. And, was there some sort of a balance needed? Maybe. But the numbers are very, very clear when you look at in the 90s when we had the Rockefeller laws imposed and incarceration rates, yes, they went up, but crime, up to, I think it was 91, the crime bill, crime increased every single year in the United States until that bill passed. And then it decreased every year, year to year, all the way down to us being the safest large city in the country. And probably based on our population in New York City, in the world. And that is no longer, and it's really a result of these disastrous policies.
What is the Take Back New York agenda, and what does it mean to New Yorkers?
Well, it's to correct all of those mistakes that have been made as far as the criminal justice, quote, reforms. And we keep calling them reforms and bail reform. It's just cashless bail. You can't hold someone, as I indicated earlier. I mean, that's the easiest one. That if I am a drug dealer, you cannot hold me, despite the fact that I'm actually not just possessing, I'm selling huge quantities of controlled substances, heroin, fentanyl, whatever it is. The judge must, they have no discretion to do it. So really, the most important aspect of the Take Back New York agenda is to give judges discretion again. And the claim that the whole system is racist, it's socioeconomic in my opinion, and most of the judges that we're talking about, particularly in New York City, are appointed.
So how do you think your background can help as a legislator and improve the lives of your constituents?
Well, I think when it comes to criminal justice, that's my thing. I'm the ranking Republican on the Codes Committee, which is everything with a penalty goes through codes. So if we're lucky enough to get the majority, I'd be the chairman. So all of those criminal justice issues would come out of my committee. So I think that role as a prosecutor is really the most important issue. Obviously, it's taxes. We're losing people, or people are leaving the state like it's on fire. And it's for a number of issues, but number one is crime. And that's across both parties, across the entire spectrum, across race, whatever it is, political affiliation, crime is number one. And that would be the most important priority. We're recovering from COVID. Let's stop bludgeoning our businesses with regulations. But most importantly, that history as a prosecutor, I think, would be extremely helpful to New Yorkers and just get us back in business.
Senator Palumbo, it's been a pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I hope to spend more time with you and talk about other policies. So thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for having me. This was wonderful.